This tutorial is to help you with Section 3, Cellular Energy. Number 38, which organism is most likely to use anaerobic respiration? So there are two types of cell respiration processes: aerobic, that uses oxygen and happens in the mitochondria, and anaerobic, that does not use oxygen and happens in the cytoplasm. Some organisms can only go through anaerobic respiration. Some organisms can only go through aerobic respiration. And some organisms can go through both aerobic and anaerobic respiration processes. And so if we look at our answer choices here, the first is the bird. And so a bird is an animal. And just like us, birds go through aerobic respiration, and they can use oxygen to make ATP in their mitochondria, but they can also switch to anaerobic respiration when their oxygen levels are low. But this is asking which is most likely to use anaerobic respiration. So anaerobic respiration is not really what the bird uses first. Then we go to moss and a tree. Well, both of those are plants. And plants go through aerobic respiration. They don't go through anaerobic processes. And then the last answer choice is yeast. And yeast go through anaerobic processes. And the type of anaerobic process that they go through is alcoholic fermentation. So although the bird can go through anaerobic respiration if oxygen levels are low, yeast are the organisms that are most likely to go through anaerobic respiration in the form of alcoholic fermentation. 39. If the xylem in a young tree is damaged, which process is first affected? So we're going to take a look at these questions, and we're going to look at which process would first be affected, which would be the next process that's affected, the third process, and the final process that would be affected. So xylem, if you remember from transport and from photosynthesis and respiration, plants have this type of tissue called vascular tissue, and vascular tissue consists of xylem and phloem, and xylem is responsible for transporting water, and phloem is responsible for transporting sugar. So this question is asking what would happen if the xylem is damaged? What would happen first? So since the xylem is responsible for transporting water from the roots to the leaves, then this would be the first thing that would be affected, transporting water to the leaves. The next question, which would be the second affected process? So we established already that transporting water to the leaves would be the first affected process. So now we're in a situation where water cannot make it to the leaves. If you remember the formula for photosynthesis, plants take 6 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of water, and they are able to make sugar, shown here as glucose, and 6 molecules of oxygen gas. So if the water is the first thing that's affected and it cannot make it to the leaves, then the second thing that would be impacted would be performing photosynthesis. So that would be the second thing that's impacted here. 41. What would be the third process affected? Well, if photosynthesis cannot occur, that means no sugar is being made. So the third process that would be affected would be transporting sugar to the roots. Then last but not least, the fourth process that would be affected is the plant would not be able to absorb water from the soil. So again, they wouldn't be able to transport water to the leaves if the xylem was damaged, which would prevent them from going through photosynthesis, which means they wouldn't have sugar to transport to the roots, and then that would prevent them from absorbing water from the soil. 43. A plant species lives in an area with limited sunlight. Which physical adaptation would be most useful to the plant? So, large leaves would be the most beneficial adaptation. And because large leaves increase the surface area to volume ratio. So, just like we looked at annelid worms in one of our previous sections and how their body gives them high surface area to volume ratio to absorb oxygen and excrete waste, here with plants, having large leaves increases the surface area to volume ratio, which equals an increase in efficiency. Okay, so having large leaves would be the physical adaptation that's most useful to the plant in an area where there is limited sunlight. 44. Two different species of bacteria are examined. Scientists find that species X always produces CO2 and water during cellular respiration. Species Y produces ethyl alcohol and CO2. Which conclusion can be made from these observations? So, this is one of those questions where it comes in very handy to have those formulas committed to memory. And so, species X always produces CO2 and water. And so, if we're looking at respiration processes, then and it tells us we're looking at cellular respiration here. We really need to write out the two formulas for cellular respiration. And one of those formulas is C6H12O6, which is again glucose, plus 6 molecules of oxygen gas, yields 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, plus 6 molecules of water, plus that 36 molecules of ATP. So that is aerobic cellular respiration. Then it tells us that species Y is making ethyl alcohol or ethanol. And so that means that no oxygen is used because that is a form of alcoholic fermentation where we produce ethanol, carbon dioxide, and only 2 molecules of ATP. So if we write these formulas out based on the information given in the question, then we have almost like a cheat sheet to go by. So option 1 says only species Y is aerobic. So again, this is alcoholic fermentation down here on the bottom, and alcoholic fermentation is an anaerobic process. Okay, this species X is aerobic process because it uses oxygen gas, and that is the only way that water can be formed. So species Y is not aerobic, species Y is anaerobic. Option 2, only species Y is anaerobic. That is true. Option 3, both species X and Y are aerobic. Again, we've eliminated that because species Y is anaerobic. Same thing with option number 4, both are anaerobic. We've eliminated that because we established that species X is aerobic. 45, what is the function of leaves? So leaves contain a high number of chloroplasts, and what that means is that leaves provide a place for photosynthesis to occur. 46. In what ways are photosynthesis and cellular respiration different? And again, I would highly recommend on that scrap paper you have for the exam that you write out these two formulas. And if you know one, you automatically know the other because they are reciprocals of one another with some minor differences. So we'll write out the formula for photosynthesis first. So 6CO2 plus 6H2O yields 1 molecule of glucose and 6 molecules of oxygen gas. And that is the formula for photosynthesis. And then if we take what's on the right side of the equation and move it to the left. So we're going to take all of this on the right-hand side, and we're just going to slide it over to the left-hand side. So we've got our glucose, C6H12O6, plus 6 molecules of oxygen gas is going to yield 6 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of water. And again, we don't want to forget about those 36 molecules of ATP. So this is asking how these processes are different. So it says cellular respiration stores ATP while photosynthesis releases ATP. Well, ATP is not part of the photosynthesis equation here. So that eliminates option 1. Cellular respiration produces oxygen. So again, this is the formula for cellular respiration here, and it doesn't produce oxygen. So whatever's on the right side of the equation is what's produced. Whatever's on the left side of the equation is what's used. So there is no oxygen produced in cellular respiration. There is oxygen used. So again, that eliminates option 2. Photosynthesis releases energy while cellular respiration stores energy. So again, releases energy. Photosynthesis, there is no energy here. There's no ATP involved in this process. There's no ATP that's part of the formula. So option 3 is also incorrect. Look at the last option. Photosynthesis uses carbon dioxide. That is a check. While cellular respiration produces carbon dioxide. That is also an accurate statement, making option 4 the correct answer for that question. 47, what is the function of autotrophs in the carbon cycle? We can again use our formula for photosynthesis because autotrophs are plants, and plants go through photosynthesis. So those are organisms that make their own food. So if we're looking at the carbon here, so use a different color here to highlight it. So CO2 has carbon and glucose has carbon. So if we're looking at the carbon cycle and what autotrophs do, we're looking at the formula for photosynthesis and paying close attention to the carbons in that formula. And so the first option says they use oxygen to produce glucose. Well, that doesn't have anything to do with the carbon cycle because oxygen doesn't have carbon in it, the oxygen gas. They take in excess water. Again, water, we're focused on carbon here, and the formula for water is H2O. Now look at this. They use carbon dioxide, again, use on the left, to produce on the right glucose. That is an accurate statement. They use CO2 to produce C6H12O6, which is glucose, and then option D should have been eliminated first to feed on herbivores, which doesn't even make any sense because that would be saying that an autotroph like a plant could feed on an herbivore like a deer, which does not make any sense. 48. How does the amount of energy resulting from fermentation, and so right there is 2 ATPs, compare with aerobic respiration? And I'm not going to write the formulas out again, but we have already established that anaerobic processes like fermentation produce 2 ATPs, while aerobic processes produce 36 ATPs. So this question is asking us to compare those two processes in terms of how much energy they produce. Aerobic respiration results in less. 36 is greater than 2, so that is inaccurate. Aerobic respiration results in more. 36 is greater than 2, so that is an accurate statement. Each process results in equal energy. 36 does not equal 2. Each process results in variable energy. And that is incorrect too because aerobic results in 36 ATPs and anaerobic results in 2. So again, the only accurate statement is that aerobic produces more energy than anaerobic. 49. Which statement best compares aerobic and anaerobic? So option 1 says less ATP is generated during anaerobic than during aerobic. That's correct. Less ATP, 2, is generated during anaerobic than 36 during aerobic. More water is generated during anaerobic than aerobic. There is no water generated in anaerobic respiration. There is only water generated during aerobic. Option 3, more oxygen is generated during anaerobic. Again, anaerobic literally means no oxygen, so that doesn't even make sense. Option 4, less lactic acid is generated during anaerobic than during aerobic. There is no lactic acid generated during aerobic respiration, none at all, making this also an inaccurate statement. So less ATP is generated, which is 2 during anaerobic, than during 36, which is aerobic. Number 50. So taking a look at this diagram, and all the options are not shown on the same page, but we'll take a look at the other options here in a second. So this diagram represents a terrarium that's exposed to sunlight. And so for the carbon cycle to continue, it's asking what must happen. And this is, again, a really important concept, looking at photosynthesis compared to aerobic cellular respiration. So if we look at photosynthesis once more, we have 6 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of water, and that yields C6H12O6, which is 1 molecule of glucose plus 6 molecules of oxygen gas. If we look at respiration, we take that same formula and we flip it around. Whatever's on the right goes on the left. Whatever's on the left goes on the right. And then we can't forget about those molecules of ATP. Now, if we really combine kind of the energy with the organelles that go through this process, then what we have is we have a chloroplast in the plants, and the sun, as shown in the diagram, is shining on those chloroplasts that are contained within the plants. And that sunlight is what allows the plants to take in carbon dioxide and water and convert it into sugar and oxygen gas. And then our mitochondria in respiration is able to take that sugar and oxygen and convert it back into carbon dioxide and water. And again, we can't forget that the ATP is also made in this process. And so this is asking what must happen for the carbon cycle to continue? And the correct answer is all organisms must continue to exchange gases. So the plants have to exchange gases with the snails, and the snails have to exchange gases with the plants for the carbon cycle to continue, because you have to have both photosynthesis in the chloroplast and respiration in the mitochondria for that process to continue. 51. A student noticed that the freshwater plant Elodea produced bubbles when placed in direct light. What could the student most likely conclude? And this is another example where having that formula for photosynthesis written down on your scrap paper is going to be very beneficial, because it's going to provide a cheat sheet for you, and you're going to be able to refer to it to answer these questions. So we expose the plant to light, and it's asking what you could conclude from that regarding the bubbles that are being produced by this freshwater plant. Option 1 says bubbles of carbon dioxide were produced. So again, Whatever's on the right is produced. Whatever is on the left is what is used. Bubbles of carbon dioxide produced. There is no carbon dioxide on the right side of that equation. Option 2, bubbles of oxygen were produced. Well, oxygen was produced, so that is a correct choice. Again, bubbles of carbon dioxide were produced from respiration. Well, that doesn't happen in plants. Bubbles of carbon dioxide are not produced. Bubbles of oxygen were produced as a result of cell respiration. Again, we're talking about putting Elodea, a freshwater plant, in light. So we're talking about the formula for photosynthesis, making option 2 the only correct answer. Number 52. Which statement best explains why animals are considered heterotrophic? So again, heterotrophs, different from autotrophs. Autotrophs make their own food. Heterotrophs cannot produce their own food. They have to get their nutrients from other organisms. And so if we look at the answer choices, option 1 says that they are able to produce food through photosynthesis. That's incorrect. Animals do not have chloroplast, which means they cannot go through photosynthesis. They are able to produce food through the process of respiration. So again, inaccurate. They're able to go through respiration, but respiration does not produce food. Respiration produces energy. Option 3, they're able to obtain nutrients by decomposing plant and animal tissue. So animals are not decomposers. Decomposers are things like fungus and bacteria. Option 4, they're able to obtain nutrients by consuming other organisms or their products, and that is by definition what a heterotroph is. 53. A contractile vacuole helps protist eliminate excess liquid. This is a pumping process which reduces pressure inside the cell and prevents it from bursting. Which is most likely the source of energy for this process? So that's what the question is actually asking us, is what is the energy for this? And the energy for that comes from ATP. So again, ATP is cellular energy. 54. Which word equation best represents the process of cellular respiration? So again, if we have this formula written out already, then we're going to be able to refer to this formula to answer our question. So carbon dioxide plus glucose. So there's no carbon dioxide on the left side of this equation. So we're going to eliminate that. Carbon dioxide plus water. Again, there's no water on this side of the equation. We're going to eliminate that. Glucose, right here it is, plus oxygen, right there that is, yields carbon dioxide and water, making option 3 the only one that represents cellular respiration. Option 4, oxygen plus water. Again, we've got the oxygen, but not the water on the left side of the equation, making option 3 the correct answer. 55. How does the body of a runner keep up with the demand for energy when oxygen levels are low? So this is kind of a trick question. We've got to be sure that we're reading this very carefully. So it's asking when oxygen levels are low. So when oxygen levels are low, what runners do, as well as other animals, is they switch to a type of fermentation known as lactic acid fermentation. And so this is what we do when we're running low on oxygen. So you can feel that burning sensation in your muscles when you're doing strenuous exercise. And this is called lactic acid fermentation, which is a type of anaerobic process. And so if you look at these answer choices, option one, through energy production in the mitochondria, that is actually a distractor because it's asking about when oxygen levels are low. If oxygen levels were high or normal, then that would have been the correct answer. Option two, through aerobic respiration in the plasma membrane. Well, first of all, oxygen is low, so that does away with aerobic. The plasma membrane does not go through aerobic respiration anyway. That's the mitochondria, eliminating option two as well. Through ATP produced directly from sunlight. Again, animals, especially a runner, doesn't have chloroplast. They don't go through photosynthesis. They don't utilize sunlight in any way. So that's incorrect. But through anaerobic respiration, specifically lactic acid fermentation in the cytoplasm, they are able to keep up with their demand for energy.